75 years ago today, one of the most infamous sites of the Holocaust was liberated. More than 1 million people were killed at Auschwitz concentration camp. Thousands more were forced into a death march before the Allied forces arrived. And here in Jacksonville, we're remembering those who lost their lives and survivors at a new gallery. On Your Side's Alex Ositis has the details.
On the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, understanding Jewish culture as well as the stories behind the Holocaust here in Jacksonville. Life in a Land of Death, the survivors' stories from Auschwitz, part of a display at Jewish Family and Community Services, showing humanity in its basic form.
Stories of hope and courage, of survival, of friendship, of how they were able to live out their faith despite being threatened with murder.
Accounts from women who lived after liberation, how they hid who they were, their traditions and customs while in camps. Allison says JFCS works with survivors, many well into their 80s, some willing to share their accounts with visitors to the gallery, making sure no one forgets the atrocities of the Holocaust. Allison says the day serves as a lesson which can keep teaching throughout the years.
Develop the tools to learn tolerance and love for all humanity.
The gallery officially opens on Tuesday. It's open to the public and free during the weekdays. Reporting, Alex Ositis, First Coast News, on your side.